Mount Fuji is one of Japan's most famous landmarks, but beneath its beauty lies a serious threat. It is an active volcano, and though it has been dormant since its last eruption more than 300 years ago, scientists warn that an eruption is still possible. If Mount Fuji were to erupt tomorrow, it could have devastating consequences, not just for Japan, but for the entire world. The Japanese government has been preparing for such a scenario for years. Experts have studied past eruptions, including the massive Hoei eruption more than 300 years ago, to understand what might happen. That eruption blanketed parts of Tokyo, then known as Edo, in thick layers of ash. A modern-day eruption could be even more catastrophic, as Japan's population and infrastructure have grown significantly since then. Scientists closely monitor Mount Fuji for any signs of activity using seismic sensors, satellite imagery, and gas analysis. Although there are currently no immediate warnings, the possibility of an eruption remains. Mount Fuji is part of the Fuji volcanic zone, a chain of volcanoes driven by the subduction of tectonic plates beneath Japan. Over time, pressure builds up beneath the surface, and when it finally releases, it can lead to a major eruption. If an eruption were to happen tomorrow, the first sign would likely be an increase in earthquakes beneath the mountain. These tremors would indicate magma rising toward the surface. Scientists would rush to analyze the data, but there might not be much time before the volcano erupts. Within hours or even minutes, explosions could begin at the summit, sending ash and volcanic gases high into the sky. The initial eruption would likely be violent, with lava and ash spewing from the crater. Depending on the size of the eruption, the immediate area around Mount Fuji could be devastated. The surrounding region, including the Yamanashi and Shizuoka prefectures, would be covered in volcanic debris. The force of the eruption could trigger landslides, further endangering those nearby. One of the biggest concerns is the impact on Tokyo, which lies about 100 miles away. Even though the city is not directly next to Mount Fuji, the wind could carry ash clouds toward the capital. A heavy ash fall could disrupt daily life, making it difficult to breathe and reducing visibility. The government has advised residents to stay indoors in case of such an event, as inhaling volcanic ash can cause severe respiratory problems. Air travel would be among the first things affected. Flights across Japan and possibly beyond would be grounded as the ash cloud spreads. Volcanic ash is extremely dangerous for aircraft, as it can clog engines and damage instruments. In past eruptions around the world, flights have been cancelled for days or even weeks. If Mount Fuji erupts, Japan's busy airports could come to a complete standstill. The eruption could also cause power outages and disrupt essential services. Ash can accumulate on power lines, causing them to collapse under the weight. Water supplies could be contaminated, and internet and phone networks might go down in affected areas. The government would need to act quickly to ensure that emergency services remain functional and that residents have access to clean water and electricity. This hypothetical scenario is not just speculation. Japan has been making detailed preparations in case Mount Fuji erupts. The government has already released guidelines for residents, advising them to store at least 2 weeks' worth of food and water. Officials have also mapped out evacuation routes and designated shelters. However, no one can predict exactly when the next eruption will happen. Scientists warn that even though Mount Fuji appears calm now, it could erupt at any time and the consequences could be catastrophic. As we move on, we will explore how the eruption could unfold over the first few days and the long-term damage it could cause. As the eruption of Mount Fuji continues into its first full day, the situation worsens. The initial explosions have sent ash and volcanic gases high into the atmosphere, and the skies above central Japan are darkened. The once iconic peak of Mount Fuji is now covered in thick clouds of smoke, obscuring it from view. Tremors still shake the ground, a sign that the eruption is far from over. With strong winds pushing the ash eastward, Tokyo and its surrounding regions begin to experience significant ashfall. But even though the city is not close to the volcano, fine volcanic ash can travel hundreds of miles. A light dusting coats streets, rooftops, and vehicles, turning the landscape an eerie gray. Residents who venture outside wear masks and protective glasses, as breathing in the fine particles can cause lung irritation and other health issues. Hospitals see an increase in patients suffering from breathing difficulties, and those with pre-existing conditions like asthma are particularly at risk. The weight of the ash also starts to take a toll on infrastructure. Although only a few centimeters have accumulated in some areas, it is enough to clog drainage systems, making roads slippery and dangerous. If the eruption continues, heavier ashfall could collapse roofs, disrupt transportation, and cause severe structural damage. Officials work urgently to clear major highways, but visibility is low, and driving conditions remain hazardous. Japan's famed bullet trains, known for their speed and efficiency, are halted as a precautionary measure. Even a small amount of ash can interfere with train operations, and major railway lines suspend service until the tracks can be cleared and the risk assessed. In some areas, bus services and subways continue running, but delays and overcrowding become widespread. With public transportation disrupted, people struggle to reach their workplaces, and businesses begin shutting down. Air travel remains at a standstill. Airports in Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya cancel all flights, as volcanic ash poses a serious threat to jet engines. The international impact begins to grow as flights scheduled to land in Japan are diverted, and airlines worldwide adjust their schedules to avoid the expanding ash cloud. The economic consequences of these disruptions are already being felt, as Japan is a major hub for international business and tourism. Meanwhile, closer to the eruption site, thousands of residents in the surrounding prefectures have been forced to flee. Evacuations continue as emergency shelters fill with people seeking refuge. Some roads leading away from Mount Fuji are covered in ash or partially blocked by falling debris, making travel slow and difficult. Authorities use helicopters and boats to evacuate those stranded in the hardest hit areas. As the hours pass, scientists monitoring the eruption analyze data to determine how long it may last. Volcanic activity can be unpredictable. Some eruptions weaken within days, while others continue for weeks or even months. If Mount Fuji follows the pattern of its past eruptions, the danger is far from over. The presence of pyroclastic flows, fast-moving currents of hot gas and volcanic material, is another major concern. These flows, which can reach speeds of hundreds of miles per hour, are impossible to outrun and can destroy everything in their path. Japan's government urges citizens to remain indoors if they are not in immediate danger. Many people have already stocked up on emergency supplies as recommended by officials, but stores in unaffected areas experience a surge in panic buying. Essentials like bottled water, non-perishable food, and batteries disappear from shelves within hours. Online orders for air purifiers and protective masks skyrocket as people prepare for prolonged exposure to ash. As we continue, we will examine the long-term consequences of the eruption, including its impact on the environment, agriculture, and Japan's economy. In the days following Mount Fuji's eruption, the scale of the disaster becomes more evident. The initial explosion was only the beginning, and now the lingering effects of the eruption begin to reshape daily life across Japan. As the ash cloud continues to spread, concerns shift from immediate evacuations to the long-term consequences that could last for months or even years. One of the most pressing issues is the growing strain on Japan's economy. The closure of airports, highways, and train lines has already caused billions of dollars in losses, and as time passes, more industries feel the impact. Factories, in the Tokyo-Yokohama region, some of the country's most important manufacturing hubs, are forced to suspend operations. Ashfall has contaminated water supplies in some areas, forcing businesses that rely on clean water, such as semiconductor plants and food processing facilities, to shut down temporarily. In rural areas surrounding Mount Fuji, farmers face a crisis of their own. Crops covered in even a thin layer of volcanic ash can be damaged beyond repair. Rice fields, vegetable farms, and tea plantations are particularly vulnerable as the ash alters the soil's pH levels and blocks sunlight from reaching plants. Livestock farmers also struggle as volcanic ash contaminates grazing fields and water sources, making it difficult to feed their animals. With food production disrupted, grocery stores in Tokyo and other major cities begin to see shortages, driving up prices and increasing pressure on supply chains. The eruption's impact extends beyond Japan's borders. Countries that import Japanese goods, particularly automobiles and electronics, face delays as factories remain closed. The stock market reacts with uncertainty, and investors closely watch how Japan's government handles the crisis. Meanwhile, tourism, a major part of Japan's economy, has come to a standstill. The famous Mount Fuji, once a symbol of beauty and tranquility, is now a disaster zone. Popular destinations like Hakone and the Fuji Five Lakes region, known for their scenic views, have been evacuated, and hotels that once hosted thousands of visitors now sit empty. Environmental consequences also start to unfold. The ash cloud that drifted over the Pacific Ocean has begun affecting neighboring countries, with reports of fine ash reaching parts of South Korea and China. While the amount is not enough to cause serious damage, Air quality levels have dropped in some areas. Scientists monitor the situation closely, as a prolonged eruption could lead to further disruptions in weather patterns, similar to how past volcanic eruptions have caused temporary cooling on a global scale. Japan's government, already working around the clock to manage the disaster, now faces another challenge: the massive cleanup effort. Removing volcanic ash from roads, buildings, and waterways is a slow and expensive process. In some areas, the ash has mixed with rain, forming a thick, cement-like sludge that clogs drainage systems. This increases the risk of flooding, especially in low-lying areas near Tokyo. Authorities deploy thousands of workers and military personnel to clear the streets, but progress is slow, and officials warn that it could take months to fully restore infrastructure. As the cleanup continues, scientists assess the state of Mount Fuji itself. The mountain's shape has been altered by the eruption, with new craters and fissures forming near the summit. Researchers conduct aerial surveys and analyze seismic activity to determine whether another eruption could occur. While the current eruption has started to weaken, experts warn that volcanic activity often comes in cycles. If magma continues to build up beneath the surface, additional eruptions could follow in the coming months. In the next part, we will explore how Japan's emergency response teams are handling the crisis, the ongoing evacuation efforts, and the challenges of rebuilding communities affected by the disaster. With Mount Fuji's eruption leaving much of central Japan in crisis, emergency response efforts shift toward long-term survival and recovery. While the immediate danger has lessened, the aftermath presents new challenges, and the full scope of destruction is still unfolding. The Japanese government and international aid organizations work tirelessly to assist displaced residents, restore essential services, and prevent further disasters from emerging in the wake of the eruption. Evacuations remain a top priority as many areas are still unsafe. The thick layers of ash covering homes, schools, and businesses have made entire towns uninhabitable. Even areas that initially seemed unaffected now face new risks: structural damage from the weight of ash, contaminated water supplies, and the increased likelihood of landslides. Heavy rains in the region could mix with loose ash deposits, triggering massive mud flows that threaten both urban and rural areas. Authorities closely monitor these conditions and expand evacuation zones as needed, sending thousands more to shelters in safer regions. Inside these shelters, overcrowding and limited resources create difficult living conditions. Despite efforts to stockpile supplies ahead of time, the sheer number of evacuees puts immense strain on food, clean water, and medical care. Hospitals struggle to keep up with the influx of patients suffering from respiratory issues caused by inhaling volcanic ash. While face masks help reduce exposure, prolonged breathing of fine ash particles can lead to severe lung problems, particularly for children, the elderly, and those with pre-existing conditions. Mobile clinics are set up near evacuation sites, but healthcare workers warn that without improved air quality, respiratory illnesses will continue to rise. Beyond the health crisis, Japan's infrastructure faces overwhelming challenges. Railways and highways leading into Tokyo remain partially shut down due to persistent ash accumulation. Bullet trains, known for their speed and efficiency, operate at a fraction of their normal capacity, and airlines struggle to resume flights as ash continues to affect air traffic. The financial burden of maintaining these closures grows daily, adding to the already staggering economic toll. Government officials estimate that full restoration of transportation networks could take months, further delaying recovery efforts. The energy sector is also under strain. Ash has coated solar panels, rendering them ineffective, and power plants located near the base of Mount Fuji remain offline due to damage. While emergency generators help prevent widespread blackouts, officials warn of possible electricity shortages, especially as demand rises in colder months. The Japanese government urges citizens to conserve power wherever possible, implementing scheduled blackouts in some regions to manage supply. Despite these hardships, Japan's response to the disaster demonstrates resilience and preparedness. The government, already experienced in handling natural disasters such as earthquakes and tsunamis, coordinates relief efforts with military precision. Volunteers from across the country arrive to assist with cleanup operations, and engineers work around the clock to clear roadways and reinforce damaged buildings. International aid also pours in, with countries sending financial assistance, medical supplies, and rescue teams. Meanwhile, scientists continue monitoring Mount Fuji analyzing gas emissions and seismic activity to determine if further eruptions could occur. While the worst appears to be over, they warn that Japan must remain on high alert. History shows that volcanoes can have prolonged eruptive periods, sometimes lasting months or even years. If new activity is detected beneath Mount Fuji, evacuation plans may need to be extended indefinitely, forcing many residents to reconsider their futures. As Japan moves from emergency response to long-term recovery, the nation faces tough decisions about rebuilding. Some communities near Mount Fuji may never be safe to return to, and large-scale relocation efforts could be necessary. The eruption has left scars not only on the landscape, but also on the people who call this region home. The road to recovery will be long, but Japan's history of resilience suggests that even in the face of such a catastrophe, the country will rebuild, adapt, and emerge stronger than before. As we wrap up, we will examine the long-term consequences of the eruption, from global economic effects to the future of Mount Fuji itself. As Japan begins the long process of recovery, the global impact of Mount Fuji's eruption becomes increasingly clear. While the immediate crisis has passed, the long-term consequences are only beginning to unfold. From economic disruptions to environmental changes, the effects of this event will be felt for years. One of the most significant global impacts is on trade and commerce. Japan, a major player in global markets, faces challenges as industries struggle to recover. Manufacturing plants shut down due to ash contamination, supply chains remain disrupted, and exports slow as ports along the Pacific coast work to clear debris and repair damage. The electronics and automotive industries, which rely on precision manufacturing, are particularly affected, causing ripple effects in international markets. Companies dependent on Japanese parts and technology experience delays, driving up costs worldwide. Tourism, a key part of Japan's economy, also suffers. Mount Fuji, once a major attraction, is now a restricted zone due to unstable ground and ongoing seismic activity. Popular travel destinations across central Japan report massive declines in visitors, and airlines struggle to resume normal operations. While the government plans to launch recovery campaigns to rebuild tourism, the uncertainty surrounding Mount Fuji's condition leaves many hesitant to return. Environmental consequences extend far beyond Japan's borders. The vast amount of volcanic ash released into the atmosphere affects global weather patterns. Scientists observe a temporary cooling effect as the fine particles reflect sunlight away from the Earth's surface. This could lead to unusual weather conditions in the coming years, altering monsoon patterns in Asia and affecting agricultural production in regions thousands of miles away. Crop yields in various countries may decline, leading to food shortages and price increases. Closer to the eruption site, the natural environment undergoes drastic changes. Rivers and lakes near Mount Fuji become polluted with ash, affecting aquatic life and local water sources. Forests on the slopes of the mountain, once lush and vibrant, are now barren, covered in layers of gray ash. Wildlife that once thrived in these ecosystems struggles to survive, forcing species to migrate or face extinction in the area. Scientists begin long-term studies on how the eruption has altered the region's biodiversity and what recovery efforts may be needed. For the people of Japan, the psychological and cultural impact of the eruption cannot be overstated. Mount Fuji, long considered a sacred symbol of the nation, now stands as a reminder of both nature's power and the fragility of human existence. Many who lived in its shadow their entire lives must now relocate permanently, leaving behind homes, businesses, and generations of history. The Japanese government provides financial aid and relocation assistance, but rebuilding lives proves to be just as difficult as reconstructing cities. Despite the devastation, Japan demonstrates remarkable resilience. Reconstruction efforts begin almost immediately, with engineers designing stronger buildings, improved evacuation routes, and better infrastructure to withstand future disasters. Scientists use new data from the eruption to refine prediction models, hoping to improve early warning systems. The experience serves as a reminder of the importance of preparation, not just for Japan, but for nations worldwide that live in the shadow of active volcanoes. As time passes, Mount Fuji will slowly recover, and so will the communities that surround it. Though its landscape has changed, its significance remains. The eruption of Mount Fuji is a defining event in Japan's history, one that reshapes the country but does not break it. The lessons learned from this disaster will help guide future generations, ensuring that even in the face of nature's most powerful forces, humanity continues to adapt and endure. Mount Spurr, a massive volcano in Alaska, is showing signs of unrest, and experts warn that an eruption could be imminent. With increased seismic activity and other warning signs, the possibility of an eruption is becoming more real. In this hypothetical scenario, we'll explore what would happen if Mount Spurr erupts tomorrow, how it would impact Alaska, disrupt daily life, and reshape the landscape in an instant. If Mount Spurr in Alaska erupts tomorrow, the first signs would likely be noticeable hours or even days before the main event. Scientists at the Alaska Volcano Observatory would detect an increase in seismic activity, small earthquakes beneath the volcano, signaling that magma was rising toward the surface. These tremors would become more frequent and intense, with some strong enough to be felt in nearby areas. As pressure built up beneath the mountain, the ground might begin to bulge slightly, a sign of magma forcing its way upward. In addition to seismic activity, changes in the volcano's summit crater would likely occur. A small lake that formed at the peak in the summer of 2024 might begin to heat up, steam rising as gases escaped from the magma below. Fumaroles, venting openings in the earth, could release more sulfur dioxide and other volcanic gases, creating a strong rotten egg smell in the air. These warning signs would trigger emergency alerts warning residents of south-central Alaska, especially in Anchorage, about a possible eruption. The region would quickly move into a state of heightened alert. The National Weather Service would begin monitoring wind patterns to predict where volcanic ash might fall, while emergency agencies would issue advisories on how to prepare. South Central Alaska residents would be urged to gather emergency supplies, including masks to protect against airborne ash, extra food and water, and plastic coverings to keep ash out of homes and vehicles. Airlines operating at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport would start rerouting flights to avoid potential ash clouds, just as they did during past eruptions. The uncertainty surrounding when and how an eruption might unfold would create tension. Volcanic eruptions are notoriously difficult to predict with exact timing, and while Mount Spurr has erupted before, each event is different. The last major eruptions in 1992 came in 3 separate bursts over 3 months, with little warning between them. If tomorrow's eruption follows a similar pattern, the first explosion could be the beginning of a prolonged period of activity. As the day progresses, Mount Spurr might begin releasing small ash bursts, an early indication that magma was nearing the surface. These bursts wouldn't be catastrophic, but would send fine volcanic dust into the air, carried by the wind toward Anchorage and other nearby areas. Social media and news reports would be flooded with images of the volcano, spewing dark smoke into the sky. Some people might rush to stock up on supplies, while others would wait anxiously for official updates. By nightfall, the eruption could be fully underway. The sky over the Tordrillo Mountains might glow with an eerie orange light as molten rock burst from the summit crater. A towering column of ash, possibly tens of thousands of feet high, could spread outward, carried by the jet stream. The people of Anchorage, just 75 miles away, would soon experience the effects as volcanic ash began to settle over the city, covering streets, cars, and rooftops in a fine, sand-like layer. Tomorrow's hypothetical eruption would be unlike anything most Alaskans have seen in decades. But as the first signs of disaster appeared, the real question would be, how bad could it get? As the eruption of Mount Spurr escalates, the effects would begin spreading far beyond the immediate area. With a towering ash cloud now rising into the atmosphere, the biggest concern would be its impact on air travel. Volcanic ash is not like ordinary smoke. It's made of tiny, jagged rock particles that can severely damage aircraft engines. Pilots flying in the region would receive urgent warnings to change course, and within hours, Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport would be forced to suspend operations. Other smaller airports in south central Alaska, including those in Kenai and Homer, would likely follow suit. The last time Mount Spurr erupted in 1992, the ash caused major flight disruptions, and this time the effects could be even more widespread depending on wind patterns. Inside Anchorage, daily life would quickly be upended. The ashfall would continue coating roads, buildings, and vehicles, turning the city into a gray, dust-covered landscape. Even a thin layer of volcanic ash can be dangerous. It clogs air filters in cars, damages electrical equipment, and makes breathing difficult, especially for those with respiratory conditions. The city's emergency services would begin distributing N95 masks, urging residents to stay indoors as much as possible. The weight of the ash could even threaten rooftops if the eruption continued for an extended period, leading to potential structural damage. Further west, closer to Mount Spurr itself, the situation would be even more dangerous. While Anchorage and other populated areas would mostly face ashfall, the remote terrain surrounding the volcano could experience far deadlier hazards. Pyroclastic flows, fast-moving waves of scorching gas, ash, and rock would race down the mountain slopes at speeds over 100 miles per hour, obliterating anything in their path. These flows are among the most lethal aspects of a volcanic eruption, capable of burying entire landscapes in superheated debris. In addition to pyroclastic flows, another major threat would be lahars, massive mud flows created when volcanic heat melts the mountain's glaciers. Mount Spurr is heavily covered in ice, and as the eruption intensifies, that ice would rapidly melt, mixing with ash and rock to form thick, cement-like rivers of debris. These lahars would rush down nearby valleys, potentially damming the Chukachatna River and backing up water into Chukachimna Lake. If enough pressure built up, the resulting flood could send a surge of water downstream, threatening remote areas and eventually reaching Cook Inlet. Authorities would be closely monitoring river levels, knowing that past eruptions of other Alaskan volcanoes have triggered catastrophic flooding. Warnings would be sent out to anyone in the region, though in such a sparsely populated area, there would be little time to react. For those living in remote cabins or working at fishing camps near the inlet, the combination of ashfall, mud flows, and potential flooding would create a life-threatening situation. Despite the chaos unfolding on the ground, the full impact of the eruption wouldn't be immediately known. Volcanic eruptions can last for days, weeks, or even months, meaning this could be just the beginning. Scientists at the Alaska Volcano Observatory would be analyzing every piece of data they could gather, trying to determine whether this was a short-lived explosion or the start of a prolonged period of activity. The last major eruptions in 1992 occurred 3 times over 3 months. If Mount Spurr followed the same pattern, Alaska might be facing long-term consequences. As the eruption of Mount Spurr continues, the long-term effects on Alaska's environment and infrastructure would begin to take shape. The immediate chaos of the ashfall, flight disruptions, and lahars would give way to new challenges, ones that could last for months or even years. The air quality across south-central Alaska would remain dangerously poor, with fine volcanic ash lingering in the atmosphere. This ash, made of tiny glass-like particles, would be hazardous to breathe, especially for children, the elderly, and those with respiratory issues. Hospitals in Anchorage and surrounding towns would likely see an increase in patients experiencing breathing difficulties, eye irritation, and other health problems linked to airborne ash. And beyond human health, the impact on Alaska's wildlife and ecosystems would also become a growing concern. The ash blanketing the landscape would seep into rivers, lakes, and streams, affecting water quality and potentially harming fish populations. Salmon, a vital part of Alaska's fishing industry and ecosystem, could struggle to survive if their spawning grounds became clogged with volcanic debris. In past eruptions, volcanic ash has led to mass die-offs of fish and other aquatic life due to changes in water chemistry and reduced oxygen levels. This disruption to the food chain could have lasting consequences for the many species that rely on these waters, from bears and eagles to seals and whales in Cook Inlet. In the mountainous regions closer to the volcano, the weight of the accumulating ash could trigger landslides, sending massive amounts of rock and debris crashing down valleys and into rivers. These landslides, combined with ongoing lahars, could alter the landscape permanently, reshaping river channels and destroying habitats. The once pristine wilderness of the Todrillo Mountains could be left scarred for decades, its slopes buried under layers of hardened volcanic deposits. The economic toll of the eruption would also become clearer. With Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport shut down for an extended period, cargo shipments would be severely disrupted. Anchorage serves as a critical hub for international air freight, particularly between Asia and North America. Any prolonged closure would lead to significant financial losses for airlines and businesses that depend on the flow of goods. Stores in Anchorage and other cities could start experiencing shortages of certain imported products, while the state's fishing and tourism industries would suffer major setbacks. The summer tourism season, which brings thousands of visitors to Alaska's national parks and remote lodges, could be thrown into uncertainty if the eruption continued into the warmer months. Efforts to clean up the ash would be a massive undertaking. Crews would work around the clock to clear roads, highways, and airport runways, but the fine, powdery nature of volcanic ash would make it a persistent problem. Even after visible layers were removed, Strong winds could stir up settled ash for months, making it feel like the eruption never truly ended. Vehicles and machinery exposed to the ash would require constant maintenance, as the tiny particles can grind away at engines, clog filters, and corrode metal surfaces. With the volcano still active, geologists would be working tirelessly to determine whether the worst was over or if more eruptions were on the way. In past events, Mount Spurr's eruptions occurred in multiple stages, sometimes months apart. If seismic activity beneath the volcano remained high, it could signal additional explosions to come. The uncertainty would weigh heavily on residents, who would have to decide whether to stay put or temporarily relocate until the danger passed. As Alaska braced for what could be an extended volcanic crisis, one thing would be certain: Mount Spurr's eruption was not just a single event, it was a disaster with lasting consequences. The question now was how long those consequences would continue. In the weeks and months following Mount Spurr's eruption, Alaska would begin the long process of recovery. While the immediate danger from ashfall, lahars, and pyroclastic flows would have passed, the long-term challenges of rebuilding and adapting to the new landscape would become the focus. The region around the volcano, once a popular destination for backcountry hikers and snowmobilers, would remain unstable for years. Large sections of land would be permanently altered, with deep ash deposits, collapsed riverbanks, and newly formed volcanic features making navigation dangerous. Scientists would continue monitoring the volcano for any signs of renewed activity, as secondary eruptions or aftershocks could still pose a risk. One of the biggest hurdles in the aftermath would be the impact on infrastructure. Even after roads and airports were cleared of ash, lingering particles in the air would cause ongoing issues. Fine volcanic ash is notorious for infiltrating ventilation systems, damaging electronics, and wearing down mechanical parts. Homes, businesses, and public buildings in Anchorage and beyond would require extensive cleaning and repairs, with some structures possibly deemed unsafe due to ash accumulation on rooftops. Power outages would also remain a concern, as ash buildup on electrical equipment could lead to failures in the grid. Water contamination would be another major issue. With ash washing into rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, water treatment facilities would need to work around the clock to ensure a safe supply for residents. In more remote areas where people rely on well water, many would find their sources compromised, forcing them to rely on bottled water or government-provided resources. Farmers and ranchers in south central Alaska would also face difficulties, as volcanic ash can severely impact soil quality, making it harder to grow crops or maintain grazing lands. The economic ripple effects of the eruption would continue to be felt for months, if not years. Alaska's fishing industry, already dealing with declining salmon populations, would struggle as volcanic debris disrupted marine ecosystems. With the tourism sector taking a hit, businesses that rely on visitors, hotels, tour operators, and local shops would face financial hardships. Insurance claims from property damage, business losses, and vehicle repairs would surge, creating delays and complications for residents trying to rebuild. Internationally, Mount Spurr's eruption would serve as a reminder of the ever-present threat of volcanoes, especially those in the Pacific Ring of Fire. Scientists around the world would analyze data from the event, using it to improve monitoring systems and refine eruption forecasting models. The lessons learned from Mount Spurr could help other regions better prepare for similar disasters in the future. Despite the challenges, Alaska is no stranger to extreme conditions. Its residents have endured earthquakes, wildfires, and past volcanic eruptions, always finding ways to adapt and move forward. With time, Anchorage and the surrounding communities would recover. Though reminders of the eruption, layers of ash in the soil, altered landscapes, and the occasional aftershock would remain for years to come. The event would go down in history as another chapter in Alaska's long relationship with its powerful and unpredictable natural forces. While the eruption of Mount Spurr may eventually fade from the headlines, it would leave a lasting mark on the region, both physically and in the minds of those who lived through it. Scientists would continue watching the volcano, knowing that one day, whether in decades or centuries, Mount Spurr would awaken again. Yellowstone National Park is home to one of the most dangerous and awe-inspiring natural wonders in the world, a supervolcano. It's not just any volcano, it's a massive geological feature sitting quietly under the surface, with the potential to cause an event so catastrophic it could change life as we know it. This supervolcano has been dormant for thousands of years, but beneath the surface there's constant movement. Magma is churning, pressures are building, And every now and then, scientists see signs that something is brewing. While we don't know exactly when it will erupt, we know that it's still an active and volatile system, and experts warn that we are overdue for an eruption. If Yellowstone were to erupt tomorrow, the immediate effects would be so intense and destructive, it would feel like a disaster movie come to life. The eruption would likely begin with a massive earthquake as magma rises toward the surface, shaking the land and sending a tremor through the region. That earthquake would be followed by an eruption of unimaginable power. The skies would quickly darken as a massive ash cloud began to billow into the atmosphere. This cloud could stretch thousands of miles, covering much of the United States and beyond. The ash would block out sunlight, creating an eerie, apocalyptic atmosphere that would make it seem like day had turned to night. The ash fallout would have immediate and devastating consequences for the environment and human life. Cities like Denver, Salt Lake City, and even further parts of the country would be buried under layers of ash, disrupting air traffic, causing buildings to collapse under the weight, and making it incredibly dangerous to breathe. Respiratory problems would become widespread as fine ash particles filled the air, while the agriculture sector would face total destruction. Crops would be destroyed and livestock would perish, leading to food shortages and economic collapse. And at the same time, pyroclastic flows, which are fast-moving superheated gas and rock avalanches, would begin to flow out of the volcano at deadly speeds. These flows would travel for miles, scorching everything in their path. The heat would be so intense that it could melt the asphalt on roads, turning even the most ordinary routes into death traps for anyone trying to escape. As the flows move, toxic gases would be released into the air, further polluting the environment and making survival even more difficult. These pyroclastic flows would continue to spread, decimating the landscape and causing even more destruction. Imagine seeing an entire region being transformed into a hellish landscape, a world where everything is set on fire and nothing survives. The eruption's effects wouldn't be limited to just the areas surrounding Yellowstone. One of the most alarming impacts would be the potential for global cooling. The vast amount of ash and sulfuric gases released into the atmosphere would block out sunlight for months, or possibly even years. This could lead to what scientists call a volcanic winter. Temperatures around the world would plummet and the weather patterns would be completely disrupted. This global cooling would have a disastrous effect on crops, leading to widespread famine and food shortages. The Earth's climate would struggle to recover, and the ripple effects would be felt in nearly every country. The economic impact would be almost beyond comprehension. The global economy relies on trade, and with airports closed, roads destroyed, and communication lines down, the movement of goods would be severely disrupted, markets would crash, and countries would face severe financial strain. Many nations would find themselves unable to deal with the economic fallout, and some might even face bankruptcy. The agricultural collapse would be devastating not just in the United States, but around the world. The financial losses would be astronomical, and rebuilding would take decades, if not longer. This is the kind of destruction that scientists have been warning about for years. While it's not certain when or if this eruption will occur, it's clear that the supervolcano beneath Yellowstone remains active. And when it finally erupts, the consequences could be far-reaching and catastrophic. The world as we know it could be completely changed by a single event. This is why it's so important to understand what Yellowstone could do and to start thinking about how we can prepare for something that, though unlikely to happen tomorrow, is still a real and possible threat. Now that we understand just how destructive a Yellowstone eruption would be, let's dig deeper into the scientific side of it. What makes this supervolcano so dangerous, and why is it considered such a threat? To start, Yellowstone is not a single volcano, but a giant volcanic system that sits on top of a hotspot in the Earth's crust. This hotspot allows magma from deep within the Earth to rise toward the surface, and over millions of years, it has created what we now know as the Yellowstone caldera, which is essentially the largest active volcanic system in North America. The key to understanding the scale of a potential eruption lies in its geological history. Yellowstone has erupted 3 times in the past 2.1 million years, with each eruption being more powerful than the last. The most recent eruption occurred around 640,000 years ago, and it was so massive that it blanketed much of the western United States in ash. That eruption was what scientists refer to as a super eruption, capable of unleashing energy equivalent to thousands of atomic bombs going off at once. While the eruptions weren't constant, the caldera has shown ongoing signs of activity, and that's what makes Yellowstone so volatile. One of the most unsettling things about Yellowstone is that scientists have found evidence of continuous seismic activity, which means that the ground is constantly shifting. This ongoing ground deformation indicates that magma is still moving beneath the surface, causing pressure to build. The U.S. Geological Survey and other scientific organizations closely monitor these changes, watching for any signs of unusual volcanic activity. Despite this constant monitoring, however, we can't predict exactly when an eruption will occur. It could happen tomorrow, next year, or even 1,000 years from now, but what is certain is that Yellowstone is still active, and one day it could erupt once again. What would an eruption like this look like from a geological standpoint? The magma chamber beneath Yellowstone contains an enormous amount of magma, much more than typical volcanoes. If this magma were to rise rapidly to the surface, it would cause the ground to crack open. The immediate eruption would start with a violent explosion, sending a colossal amount of ash and gas into the air, potentially reaching altitudes that could affect the global atmosphere. At the same time, lava would pour from the caldera, creating rivers of molten rock that would flow for miles, scorching everything in their path. The sheer volume of material ejected during a Yellowstone eruption is mind-boggling. It's believed that the eruption could send hundreds of cubic kilometers of ash, lava, and volcanic gases into the atmosphere. To give you an idea of how massive this would be, a typical volcanic eruption releases a few million cubic meters of magma, but a Yellowstone super eruption could release more than 1,000 times that amount. This is what makes Yellowstone such a dangerous and unpredictable force in nature. The sheer scale of its potential eruption could dwarf anything we've ever seen in recorded history. In addition to the direct effects of an eruption, another issue would be the ongoing environmental changes that would follow. The ash alone would be enough to alter weather patterns for years. The global cooling effect, often referred to as volcanic winter, could cause temperatures to drop significantly, leading to frost and snow even in the middle of summer. This kind of climate change would lead to massive disruptions in the natural world. Ecosystems would be severely impacted, with plant and animal life struggling to survive in an altered environment. The global food supply would be in danger as crops would fail due to the lack of sunlight and sudden drops in temperature. This environmental shift would not only impact agriculture but also human health. The ash in the air would make it difficult to breathe, and the toxic gases like sulfur dioxide could cause widespread respiratory problems. Even if people managed to escape the immediate impact zone, the effects of the eruption would continue to affect them no matter where they went. These gases could cause acid rain, poisoning bodies of water, and further destroying the landscape. Yellowstone's eruption would also put major stress on the global economy. Countries would face immense financial difficulties as they tried to deal with the aftermath. The eruption would likely take out entire regions of infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and electrical grids. This would make it impossible for many areas to function normally. Airports would be shut down, making it nearly impossible to fly anywhere. Cities would be cut off, and it would be difficult to deliver aid to affected areas. Global supply chains would collapse, and businesses would struggle to recover, leading to widespread economic hardship. This kind of catastrophic event could take years to recover from, and some areas might never fully return to normal. The risks associated with Yellowstone are not just theoretical. They are very real, and it's something we must prepare for. While scientists continue to monitor the area, there's no way to predict exactly when the eruption might occur. What we do know is that the signs are there, and we need to be aware of what could happen if that time comes. Being prepared means understanding the scale of the threat, the environmental impact, and the potential consequences of such a devastating event. As we continue to explore the potential effects of a Yellowstone eruption, it's important to focus on the immediate aftermath and the challenges humanity would face in the wake of such an event. What happens after the eruption? What would the world look like, and how would society respond to this unprecedented disaster? First, we need to understand how the landscape itself would be transformed. The eruption would be so catastrophic that the area around Yellowstone would be left nearly unrecognizable. A massive crater would form where the caldera used to be, and the ground itself would collapse, creating a huge depression in the Earth's crust. This massive void would change the geography of the region, and rivers, lakes, and forests would be forever altered. The eruption would not just affect Yellowstone National Park, it would change the entire surrounding area, possibly affecting as much as half of the United States. One of the most immediate threats would be the ash fallout. This ash would blanket the landscape for hundreds of miles, severely impacting infrastructure and making everyday life nearly impossible. Imagine entire cities buried under inches or even feet of ash. Roads would be impassable, and buildings would collapse under the weight. Ash would clog machinery, including cars and aircraft, making transportation nearly impossible. It would even be dangerous to breathe, as the fine particles would cause severe respiratory issues for anyone caught in the fallout. For those who survived the initial explosion, they would now be facing an environment that is toxic and suffocating. One of the greatest challenges would be the massive number of displaced people. Cities and towns across the affected regions would be evacuated, as the ash would make it impossible to live or work in those areas. This could lead to a mass exodus, with millions of people trying to find safety in other regions. However, with transportation systems destroyed and the roads blocked, movement would be extremely difficult. Temporary shelters would be set up in less affected areas, but these would quickly become overwhelmed, leading to overcrowded conditions and shortages of food, water, and medical supplies. Humanitarian aid would be essential, but getting help to those who need it would be incredibly challenging due to the disrupted infrastructure. The economic impact of the eruption would also be catastrophic. Trade routes, both domestic and international, would be completely disrupted. The ash cloud would block out sunlight, causing crop failures around the world. This would lead to widespread food shortages, especially in countries that rely on American exports. Global economies would be plunged into turmoil, and many countries could face a complete collapse. The damage to the environment, infrastructure, and economy would take years, even decades, to recover from. The climate would change dramatically as well. With the massive amounts of ash and sulfur dioxide released into the atmosphere, a phenomenon known as volcanic winter would take hold. This would cause temperatures to drop significantly around the world. For a time, the Earth's climate could cool by several degrees, which would have devastating consequences for agriculture. Short growing seasons, colder temperatures, and altered precipitation patterns would cause crop failures and make it harder to produce enough food to feed the global population. The cooling effect could last for months or even years, making it difficult for humans to adapt and survive. As the world deals with these dramatic environmental and societal changes, governments and organizations would be scrambling to respond. Emergency services would be overwhelmed, and it's uncertain whether they would be able to reach all affected areas. Even if rescue and relief efforts were successful in some regions, many areas would be left to fend for themselves. In some places, emergency crews might be unable to reach those in need due to blocked roads, destroyed buildings, or hazardous conditions. The sheer scale of the eruption would make it incredibly difficult to mount an organized response, and without communication lines, coordination would be nearly impossible. In the wake of such destruction, society would have to adjust to a new normal. With the economy shattered and the environment severely impacted, life as we know it would fundamentally change. The social fabric would be tested as people scramble to survive, and communities would need to come together to rebuild what was lost. Governments would face enormous challenges in managing the recovery process. Resources would be scarce, and the long-term environmental damage could affect generations to come. What's clear is that the eruption of Yellowstone would not just be a natural disaster, it would be a global crisis that would reshape the course of human history. What would be the psychological and emotional toll on people? It's hard to imagine the level of trauma that would follow such an event. The loss of loved ones, homes, and entire communities would be heartbreaking. People would be forced to confront not only the immediate devastation, but also the long-term effects of living in a world drastically changed. The constant uncertainty about when or if life will ever return to normal would create widespread anxiety and stress. It's difficult to say how people would cope with the aftermath of something so overwhelming, but the survival instinct would likely push many to keep going. Even in the face of the most dire circumstances, the aftermath of a Yellowstone eruption would be far more than just a natural disaster. It would be an event of such immense scale that it would challenge the very survival of humanity. From the immediate environmental destruction to the long-term societal and economic consequences, the world would be irrevocably changed. As we reach the final part of this exploration into the hypothetical eruption of Yellowstone, it's important to reflect on how the world might eventually recover. Although the scale of the disaster would be unprecedented, humanity has always shown remarkable resilience in the face of catastrophe. In this part, we'll look at the potential paths to recovery and what steps would need to be taken to adapt to a drastically changed world. And one of the most pressing challenges would be rebuilding the global infrastructure. After the eruption, communication systems would be down. Electricity grids would be destroyed, and many roads would be impassable due to ash, lava, and the collapse of structures. The immediate aftermath would be chaotic, with governments and organizations trying to re-establish order and get aid to the people who need it most. While recovery would be slow, it's possible that technological advancements could help speed up the process. In the years following the eruption, nations might work together to rebuild their infrastructures, focusing on alternative energy sources and more resilient designs for homes and cities. The goal would be to create a more sustainable and adaptable society that could withstand future natural disasters. The environmental recovery would be just as crucial but far more difficult. The volcanic winter caused by the eruption would cause crops to fail globally, leading to food shortages. In the months and years following the eruption, scientists would be studying the effects on the atmosphere, climate, and ecosystems. It's likely that agriculture would need to be radically transformed. Traditional farming methods might be replaced with new techniques that are more resistant to the harsh conditions created by the eruption. Vertical farming, genetically modified crops, and innovations in food production could become critical to feeding a world that is struggling with crop failures. Additionally, efforts to restore ecosystems damaged by ash and pyroclastic flows would be essential, but the recovery of forests, rivers, and wildlife could take decades, even centuries. Another area that would need significant attention is the psychological impact of such a disaster. The eruption of Yellowstone would not just be a physical disaster, but a psychological one as well. People around the world would be dealing with grief, trauma, and fear, as entire communities and cultures might be wiped out. In the aftermath, mental health support would be essential to help individuals and families cope with the emotional toll of the disaster. The loss of homes, loved ones, and the familiar world would require extensive counseling, therapy, and community rebuilding. Over time, people would need to find hope and purpose in the midst of devastation, and mental health organizations would be on the front lines, helping people adjust to the new reality. The global economy would eventually need to stabilize as well. Although this would take time, the eruption would disrupt global trade, cause widespread unemployment, and leave economies in ruins. But history has shown that economies can recover, albeit slowly. A focus on sustainable development and rebuilding industries would be key to long-term recovery. New markets would likely emerge, such as those focused on clean energy and technologies to mitigate future disasters. Countries that are able to adapt to the new environmental conditions and work together in rebuilding global supply chains may be able to bounce back more quickly. However, the global community would need to reimagine the way we operate as a species, moving away from reliance on fossil fuels, for example, and focus on creating systems that can withstand future challenges. In the face of all these challenges, one of the greatest opportunities for recovery would lie in international cooperation. The eruption of Yellowstone would affect the entire globe, and no single nation would be able to recover alone. In fact, the scale of the disaster would make global cooperation essential. Countries would need to share resources, information, and expertise to rebuild and adapt to the new environmental realities. While the eruption could strain international relationships, it could also serve as a wake-up call, pushing nations to collaborate in ways they never have before. Together, we would have to tackle the issue of climate change head-on, learn from past mistakes, and build a future that is more resilient to natural disasters. As humanity slowly adapts to life in a post-Yellowstone world, one thing would be certain: the eruption would leave an indelible mark on our collective consciousness. We would likely come to view the world differently, more fragile, more interconnected, and more in need of careful stewardship. The disaster would remind us of how vulnerable we are to the forces of nature, but also of our incredible ability to rebuild and rise from the ashes. In the end, the recovery from a Yellowstone eruption would be one of the greatest challenges humanity has ever faced. It would test our survival instincts, our ability to adapt, and our willingness to come together as a global community. The consequences of such an event would ripple through history for generations to come, but with perseverance and innovation, life could eventually return to something resembling normalcy. What's clear is that the world would never be the same again, and humanity would have to learn from this catastrophic event to build a more sustainable, resilient future for ourselves and future generations. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild journey into the world of Yellowstone and what would happen if it erupted tomorrow. I hope this scenario has sparked your curiosity about the potential impacts of natural disasters. Let me know in the comments how you would prepare for such an event. And as always, don't forget to check out my other videos on natural disasters and emergency preparedness, you never know what might be next.